goes until the very end, but I hate it because then I feel like I'm bringing people back before they're ready, and I always feel so bad about that. But it looks like we're at 31 people, so I think that's the whole group. So hope that was fun. Hope you learned a few things about the folks in the room. Like I said, we love doing this because it's just a chance to invite people into your lives, get a chance to share something a little bit personal about you, and really just start building these relationships. That is what community engagement is all about. I know that's my favorite thing, or used to be my favorite thing about going to community meetings in person, just having those conversations as you're getting coffee, getting those danishes, and just like those natural organic conversations that happen, that sometimes it can be hard to factor in and structure in those casual conversations through virtual engagement. But I'd love to take the next 5 minutes just because I'm sad that I missed out on what you all shared. So I, for selfish reasons, would like to see just a couple of things of what folks talked about and what they brought. So I wonder if someone wants to hold up something homemade, if someone found that and check that off in their scavenger hunt. Okay, I'm seeing my friend from Mass in Motion holding up a cookie. Nice. Delara, those
Like beautiful earrings. I love those colors.
Did you make those, or did a friend or an Etsy shop make them?
Yeah, I was sharing. This was done, my sisters and I did it as like a little craft. I'm not a creative person, so I'm trying to lean into that side. So we made earrings out of polymer clay. It's super easy, and you like put it in your oven to bake and it's done. So
nice. Yeah, those are beautiful.
Thank you.
Can we actually stop sharing for just a second so we can, people are holding up? Thank you so much, Tanaya.
Appreciate that. I know I was scrolling through all of your faces, but I'm always worried I'm going to miss something. Okay, what about something of value? I feel like there's usually a good story behind that one. Anyone holding up something of value, or you may not have found one.
Is that a bike? A bike. Julia has a bike. Yes.
Nice.
Are you an avid biker?
I am not a really avid biker, but I had biked on a bad bike and then bought a used bike this summer, and I said it was a value because it's keeping me sane during the.
Yes.
So my phone is of value to me because everything I need to know is in here.
Nice. Yes.
True.
Technology is a privilege right now. Phones are really helpful. I'm also an avid biker. I haven't been able to do it as much as I used to, but I got in the last long bike ride maybe 2 weeks ago when we had that nice little, last week maybe it was, we had a little bit of nice weather.
Yeah, that was great. What about something that brings you joy?
I'll say mine. Club Quarantine on IG. DJ'd by DJ D Nice. That brings me joy every time he's on.
Nice. I'm seeing lots of enthusiastic head nods, so I don't think you're the only one, Brenda. Thank you for sharing. Anything else?
Music's just so motivating right now. I think it's a great way. Movement, music. I mean, I'm like dancing. There's no music. It's just in my head. It's also because I'm cold and the movement is good for me.
For me, it's walking in the woods or on the beach. I walk for 2 miles every day that I can get out there, which is at least 5 times a week. And either being surrounded by trees or surrounded by the ocean. And I have both here. So gives me untold joy. It really makes the end. I do it at the end of the day so that it's sort of a de-stressor.
Yeah, that's so nice, especially now with the daylight being so limited in the evenings. It's really nice to get out and enjoy that. I know I live on like the lowest southern part of Dorchester, so I'm pretty close to the Blue Hills. So I've been going there a lot on weekends just to get around some trees. Seeing a lot of other folks say nature brings you joy as well. See ceramics, drawing, yoga, Zumba, nice mix of like creative outlets, moving your body. Love it. My cats, yep, mine too. Although sometimes he brings me joy, sometimes he really bugs me, especially when he walks across my laptop during important client meetings. What about something quarantine related? What did folks select for that? Nicole,
Math.
oh, your mask, hand sanitizer, soap. Yep. You know, my collection of masks is just growing exponentially. I bought a ton of floral ones for summer, but now that it's getting to be fall and winter, I'm like, obviously I need fall and holiday themed masks. So I just bought another round of Etsy ones. Awesome. Anything else that folks want to share? I'm really enjoying this. So thank you for indulging me and just bringing a little piece of yourself to this space.
I feel like there'll be like some postmodern artwork related to recycled masks in the next year or so. Maybe we can make some earrings out of them. Some wearable jewelry.
Yep.
There's gonna be so much extra fabric. I have a lot too, and I'm just like, what's gonna happen when this is done?
We'll see like quarantine quilts in like 10 years. When you collect enough, you can just make a whole blanket out of them. Awesome. Well, again, just thank you all so much for sharing. It's really nice to be able to get to know a little bit more about you, what you're passionate about, what brings you joy, along with bringing in some of your professional experience too. So Jamiah, if you have nothing to add, I'll pass it over to you to dive into some content now.
Let's get back into the slides. Thank you. Thank you for taking us through that activity. And you know, that's just one exercise that you can do. I have found that in a lot of my community work, that one of the basic things that they can do is spend more time getting to know each other and less time doing some of the work. And that can be a really great way to build trust and to strengthen your relationships with your members. And so I think, and to the extent that you can incorporate more icebreakers and time together to just socialize, the better it will be. And so community engagement is really about working collaboratively with one another, with people who have shared experience, who have similar interests, are near each other, and really have a similar outlook or similar situations that they're in that they really want to see change. And we collaborate and work together in order to create better systems and better ways of being in order to address those challenges. And when we work in collaboration, we are able to build partnerships, whether that's through coalitions or mobilizing of residents and different entities within a community, that we can really move together to influence systems and power and really change the way things are in our communities. And there are many different strategies, and community organizing is a type of community organizing. There are ways to use that as a tool for engagement and vice versa. So it's sort of like on this spectrum of different ways that we can support each other to create those changes. I did want to just give a quick little question to you all, because I mentioned power, and we're going to get into that in a second. But if you can just drop in the chat box, you know, when you think of power, the word power, what comes to mind? What word or phrase comes to mind when you hear the word power? You just throw it in the chat box, or you can say it out loud. Government, Audre Lorde, nice. Money, energy, yes. Influence, unequal, yes. Brenda, can you tell me a little bit about racism and how you connect that to power?
Because racism was created by the individuals who are in power.
Yes, so it advantages some people, gives them power, and disadvantages other people and makes them feel less powerful.
Yes.
Julia, do you mind talking about decision making?
Sure. I think one thing we talk a lot about in our work is sort of who is at decision-making tables, who has access to fund distribution, policy creation, et cetera. And those are usually white people with power or have power because of that space. Right, yeah. And oftentimes it's based in organizational structure or traditional ways. I see someone also put that in, of how things have been done. And so creating a new structure that allows people to come in becomes difficult. These are all really great answers that you're putting in here. Thank you for that. Go to the next slide. And so this is something that was created by the Interactive Institute for Social Change, and I should add that to the slide, and I forget to. But when we think of types of power, it's great to think of it in this sort of structural way, because it allows us to think about how we can actually make changes to it. And because power is the ability to control circumstances, to have influence on others, if we think of it in this sort of structural way, it allows us to think about, okay, how do we engage in this specific type of power to try to change it and shift those dynamics. So there's 4 listed here. We have institutional, which is the specific sectors that exist in society and the control that they have. And so we can think of specific systems that exist. Some institutions, for example, the criminal justice system, educational system, those are all different types of institutions that have impact. And we can think about within them how they influence the broader society over time, but also that they are structures that are made up of individuals that also have different types of power. When we think of structural power, we're really thinking of the relative standing that an organization or a community has and an individual within a structural power. So we can talk about the government, and they have a lot of structural power within our society. It's also an institution, right? And we can think of structural as well as, within an educational system, a teacher has less structural power than the principal, for example, but perhaps a little bit more structural power than parents or students. But we know that parents and students can also exert their power in other ways. And so when you think about structural power in this way, you might want to think about, how do we adapt this system to influence a certain power? And within social, this is really moving towards the broader culture and sort of what pieces of your identity, of your culture, of your values have certain power. And so to the point that Brenda made, when we think about race and racism, white people have more power than BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We can think about gender and men having more power than women or trans people. We can think about it in terms of religion and other factors, cultural factors. We can also think about it in values, because certain values are upheld more than others. And this is really, this is a lot more convoluted than institutional and structural, because it's really looking at how we view things in society. And then psychological is really about individual personal power and how you are emotionally flexible, your ability to bounce back, to be resilient, the ways in which we internalize different factors into our life. So you can internalize racism, you can internalize heterosexism or classism or different things. And we all know that different people can take in those systems, can experience trauma and have different levels of psychological power. And this isn't to say like certain people have more power than other, but to articulate that there is psychological power that exists within the individuals the individuals in society, and then how that then plays a role in how we can influence other parts of the system. And so, you know, if we work with individuals, if we're case managers, how do we build the psychological power? And then if you want to make those folks into leaders, to be advocates, how do we then take that psychological strength to then influence social and structural power systems? And so this is just a really nice way to think about power. And I want you all to keep it in mind as we continue to go through a couple of other slides and just thinking broadly about our engagement, because we all have a role. We think about ourselves as individuals in a system, in an organization, in a structure, but then also the influence that we have in those different structures. Go to the next slide. So, out loud or in the chat, how do you see power dynamics show up in your work at any of those levels that were discussed? Please feel free to unmute if you have an example to share, or you can put it into your chat. Yeah, a lot of clinical supports do tend to be white, and their patients and their clients not. I think that is that's common in a lot of spaces. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Community, company leadership power, the board. Yes, the board has most boards, most steering committees really have a lot of influence on on how an organization operates. And if those folks maybe have higher social power or higher psychological power within the board, then the way that they influence matters. Right? And so they may not be as flexible, and that could really impact the work that you're doing. Yes, adults versus youth, that is a really good example of both structural and social power. And you know, in this society, in American culture, we tend to value adults and wisdom and as being more wise or more valuable.
When people from different backgrounds get together, they create an invincible power.
I'm just having a little trouble hearing whoever's talking. Is that just me or?
Yeah, it's a little soft. I'm not sure. Maybe lean closer into your laptop if you're not using a headset.
I have some issues today with the camera and the audio. I see it now. I'm gonna type out my comment on the chat.
Sure, go ahead. So formal education is seen as more powerful than lived experience. Yes, that's something that we talk a lot about at our organization as well when we're doing professional development, hiring and recruitment. If this position really needs to have a advanced degree or a degree at all, and is lived experience just as valuable? Is it required, or are we just thinking this is more important? That's a really great one, Janet. Thank you for sharing. These are all really great. But yeah, just continue to think about how we see those different levels of power playing out. go to the next slide. And this is just a framework that I like to use just to kind of talk about how we see change, over time, and how we can kind of shift from the psychological power piece to the more of the institutional power. And so we know that individual change is really important to building that psychological power, and that's really focused on direct service, and some of the work that we see that clinicians are doing, agencies, community-based organizations. These are really focused on building that psychological power and even potentially some social power. But as we move more into to the right side of the screen along the spectrum, we really want to get to social change and movement building, that we want to really think about the power dynamics that exist between institutions and systems and social power. And how do we leverage the power that people have, to the point that Evelyn's making in the chat? When people do get together, you can leverage that power, the lived experiences of diverse groups of people, to move something forward. And come together. And, you know, along the way are different opportunities to engage with folks, to engage with your residents, your members, to do outreach, to move them along. Because the truth of the matter is, you know, doing a one-to-one engagement, like a phone call, or, you know, you meet someone at a tabling event and you talk to them, that's an individual engagement. But once you then move them along to be part of a group, to join a committee or something like that, then you move them into the larger structure to make that change. And so that is what this work is trying to do, and thinking about ways along the spectrum that we not only engage with people, but that we can create that change and shift those power dynamics. Go to the next slide. So just like a quick check-in though too, is this making sense to people, or do they have any questions before I move into the next part? Okay, seems like people are doing okay here. So I want us to keep these things in mind before we get into some more specific examples of strategies, types of outreach, and then tactics for doing more organizing and advocacy type work. Is that because we know that people are in different spaces, and even now we understand that there's even more challenges to engaging, that we really try to meet people where they are, and at what point in the spectrum they are. You know, you may need to do a lot of one-to-one engagements before they move into a committee or want to be a part of the movement. But you still always want to remain goal-oriented, because you want them to move along to the movement building and to be part of that. And along the way, you're always building those meaningful relationships. So again, community, yes, community are definitely experts. We want to center community members. We want to start with where they are. They come first. So you take your cues from them. And so, you know, even if you want to get to the social change and no one in the community is ready for that, you have to wait, you know, you have to be patient and move them along to that point and be a facilitator of getting them to where they need to be. So just keeping these kind of key things in mind, that we want to center community, we want to meet them where they are, but always keep whatever our goal, our intentions are for the change, the engagement, whatever it is that we want to achieve, that we are still mindful of that. So the first example, you can go to the next slide. You can keep going, sorry. So just to kind of take a step back though, before getting into specific examples, is, in this presentation, I would normally share, a few different things that I've seen But we thought it would be helpful to allow you some space to sort of problem solve some of these things. We know that there's always been some challenges to reaching certain populations. And one of the things that we can do is name some of those populations. And so sometimes it's hard to reach youth. It's been hard to reach folks that are non-English speakers or multilingual people. It can be difficult to reach seniors. There are tons of people in the population that are really difficult for us to reach because we don't necessarily employ the right strategies, or we make assumptions about why they are participating or not participating. But we need to really start with where they are by trying to understand how we can reach them. And so even within this new context of COVID-19, it's really just exacerbated some of those challenges. In the digital divide, as someone mentioned in the very beginning, becomes even more apparent as we try to do everything virtually and online. And to, a lot of the extent your ability to participate right now has a lot to do with your access or your job or whatever it may be, that it gives you space and time to participate right now. And that's not the case for many people, and they don't get the ability or the opportunity to do things. So how do we create more opportunity? And when we think about equity, that is really about creating opportunity for people to participate. And so a lot of what we're going to present now is thinking about, if these are all the potential strategies we can use, how do we create space to really target those folks that we are most challenged by? And part of that may require a little bit more of our time. So we can go to the next slide. So the first example, the first area we're going to cover is outreach. And these are all strategies I'm sure you're quite familiar with. They're very specifically thinking about traditional forms of getting people in. So how you're promoting and reaching out, doing direct outreach to potential members, people that you want to do something, you're asking them to do something, to join something, to sign something, whatever it is. And these are all different types of ways to do that. And many of them are not something we can really do in this time, such as tabling at events, having meetings in person, or door knocking is even technically thought of as something that we cannot do now. And so how do we think and strategize about ways that we want to engage with people? And so let's go to the next slide. Some considerations to make. And so before we break out into our first sort of activity or scenario that we have for you all, is we want you to think about this. This is sort of your assessment, and we like to do these assessments in general to think about who's actually able to participate and who's given the opportunity to participate. And these are just three very simple questions you can ask. Like, what is the purpose or goal that you're trying to achieve? So, events and community meetings are very challenging right now. We are not hosting large meetings or events, or in a traditional sense where you invite people to come for this 2-hour session or whatever have you. We're not able to do those. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of that event that we're trying to do, that community meeting? And is the event the right way to achieve that goal? Is it purposeful? Does it allow us to still achieve our goal, or are there alternative ways for us to achieve our goal, right? So we want to start there, because we can be so traditional, and it's very challenging to shift, that we don't necessarily think, well, maybe this isn't the best way to do it anymore. And what are the other ways that we can think about? Who is reached by having these events? And just 2 questions to start with is, who is your core audience? So let's say we switch to a virtual space, right?
and we have this meeting virtually, you know, there are always people that will attend. You know, there are your core members, your core audience that always engages, you know, there's still people that may be left out, but there's some motivation that gets people to attend. So we want to think about what is the motivation and, you know, how we might get that information as well. Then we want to think about who is left out. And so what are the challenges that your members or your audience are facing right now? What is going on in their lives? What may be preventing them from engaging? What would help them to engage as well? And what are some of the alternative ways to reach your members or your audience? So these are very broad questions to consider. Before we go into the first breakout group, you can go to the next slide. This is the example that we're going to look at. And I know this has been a challenge for many people. So your organization's annual gala is coming up, and it's something that you've been participating in or hosting for the last 15 years. And the event really helps support a lot of your fundraising for the year. And you're obviously concerned about switching this to a virtual event because you will reduce participation potentially. How would you potentially change the tactics to make your annual event a success? How would you create multiple opportunities for engagement, particularly for those that could be challenging? I named a few here, non-English speakers, it could be seniors or whoever, and those that don't have internet access. So I want you to first think about, this is the event, the annual gala. Go through that slide, that table. What is the purpose of this event? Why is this valuable? And is this the best way to do it? And what are some potential alternative ways to do it? And how might you create an event that still reaches that purpose and ensures a diverse ways to achieve that? You can keep in mind some of the strategies that exist already that I stated in the one of the earlier slides, but also some time really honing in on that little assessment. If this is a virtual event, who would be attending and who would not be attending, be left out? And if people are left out, how else might you get them to engage? Any questions?
Just for some added context, I shared a Google Doc in the chat box. If it helps, you can fill it out. You'll be split up into about 5 groups, so there are 5 tables, but you don't have to fill that out if that's not helpful to you. We just want to provide that as a framework and as a reminder for you to think through this scenario.
Any questions on how to think this through in your group? You feel confident you can move through the table or think about how you might hold this annual gala virtually? Okay, so I think we are all set. I don't see anyone putting in the chat box or saying anything right now. When you do go into your breakout rooms, you can ask for help if you need it, and we can go in and support you there. And how much time do we have in these groups?
I think we can probably do 15 minutes just to make sure that you have enough time to talk through, and then bring you back for a discussion, and then we'll do it all over again with a different scenario. How's that sound, Jamiah? 15 minutes?
That works. That sounds good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to let folks be able to look through the document so that we can also see each other as we close out the groups.
And this is another tactic you can bring back to your coalition trainings and meetings too. If you want to solicit group feedback, shared Google documents are a great way to do that, where you can all edit at the same time, get folks' voices heard, without just having it be the coalition leaders at the front of the room facilitating and coming up with ideas.
And you can always have someone who can type in things that are in the chat box, you know, into that. It's really important, like when you do these types of things, to, you know, have really clear roles for the meeting, because someone can be sort of navigating the challenges of, or those dynamics of making sure that all the content is collected in the right space. Still have one more group coming back.
Looks like everyone's back, Jamiah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so looking at this document, you guys came up with some really great ideas here. There's agreement that the that the purpose of this is for fundraising. And you all seem to have come up with some ideas on potentially what this could look like if you were to switch it, because maybe the virtual gala isn't the best option. Would any of you like to share some of the things you guys came up with? So I see group one had a few ideas. Drive-through event. How might the drive-through event work as a nice alternative to a virtual event? How would that work?
One of our groups said that you could have a swag bag or some kind of a meal or something that people are going to participate in, but they go to a central location to pick it up and bring it back to their virtual space and then participate from there. So not a full drive-through experience, but an element of that.
Love that idea. I participated in something like that over the summer. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Waltham area, but the Waltham Community Fields Farm, they always have a big end of harvest season picnic where they have like a string band and a ton of people come to the farm and celebrate, have a big dinner. But this year they obviously couldn't do that. And so they set up, like what you were saying, little to-go baskets that have farm fresh picnic supplies and goodies that you can then bring back to your house, and then you can stream in the band that is playing at sunset on the farm. So that's a great idea. It's very enjoyable.
So I'm going to let folks, kind of read through this, because you're coming up with some really great alternative things to do. And particularly knowing that the goal is fundraising, finding other ways that you can continue to fundraise. But some secondary goals you've shared are raising enthusiasm, getting to know about the organization. And so what are the ways that you can do that too? One of the other important parts of a fundraising event is you usually have sponsorships, right? So it's not just individual attendees that go, but you usually try to get sponsors to participate. And so being really creative and thinking about other ways that sponsors can also participate and that they can sort of get something out of the event as well. This is also a time when, despite all the challenges, people are actually, I can't remember where I recently read this report, but people are actually more willing to give. So it's still a good time to try to continue to do fundraising. And you just have to try to think of additional ways to do that. Now, who is left out? Those that non-English speakers, what are some ways that you can support that? So providing interpreters definitely works when you're having an event. There are some challenges with interpretation online. Many people have faced it with either some of the logistical things of it or just general confusion with those who are participating, not totally understanding how to engage with the Zoom. So how might you support those folks in engaging in the Zoom or whatever the platform you're using?
Are we answering right now?
Oh, yes, go ahead and answer.
Maybe using a translator over the phone to ahead of time to like explain Zoom or like mailing Zoom instructions with pictures and everything.
Yes, that's
Language.
exactly what you can do. You can do a preliminary phone conversation. You can walk people through how you use a Zoom. So when the event is happening, they can understand it. So you can kind of prep them. You can do other ways of doing it. So mail or email are other ways that you can share. So there's ways that you can prepare people. And if you don't have the accessibility of actually doing that in the event, you can also hold a separate event that's fully in a language. If you have a large membership that does not speak English and that is predominantly some other language, you can hold an event that is just geared towards that community. And you know, it doesn't have to feel like a siloed event, but it just feels like a very targeted event to really build those relationships with the members of that community. What about people who don't have access to technology? How would you engage them in that fundraising goal? What might you do to engage people that don't have access to technology?
Are we asking how do we solicit donations from people who don't have access to technology? Is that the question?
I'm asking, how would your goal is to raise money here, right? So if people don't have access to technology to participate in a virtual event, how might you engage them in fundraising?
If they have a phone, you can do, you can have them like phone in and still hear what's going on. Like if you have a comedian there or something, they can at least hear that. But if they don't have a phone, maybe like you said, mailing them like a goodie bag of stuff, like a t-shirt from the organization explaining what's going on.
So that's a way that they could definitely participate in the virtual event. How do you also how do you get them to support the main goal of fundraising?
Seeing in the chat, people are saying flyers and community access television. I love both of those ideas, especially the community access television, because I think it's something we so often forget that there is an audience for, particularly for the harder to reach, like aging adult population too.
Yes, that is really a great way to think about it, because we tend to try to be so modern that there are very tried and true ways of engaging people that are very traditional. And sometimes doing it old school is what works. And so I don't know who asked the question to begin with, because I was on two screens, but so maybe the question is then not how we get them to the event, but how do we get them to engage in the fundraising piece? And so that changes the strategies that you might use by changing the question, because you clarified what the goal is. It is fundraising, and fundraising doesn't always mean an event. It could also be multiple things. So you can be doing an event one day, or a series of events or a few short events. You can do community access television another time. And you can do maybe an online pledge or something like that another time, or all simultaneously, right? So there's multiple ways for your folks to participate with the same goal. And so, you know, maybe it's no longer one event that you're holding, but you're really trying to create a diverse way opportunities for people to participate, so you can try to reach as much as your target audience as possible.
So this question, I had some difficulty with it, and we talked about it a little bit, because if I'm trying to get funding, I'm looking at a very specific audience of people who have money. And I'm not looking at the general population of my community. Even though I might have some clients there to tell their story, or, you know, something of that nature. So my donors would all have access to internet. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a different, it feels like two different worlds you're asking us about. If it had been,
well,
you're trying to do a community event where you're trying to introduce your agency to the community, that's a different story. But if I'm raising funds, which I don't do, but if I did it, I would be targeting only those people who are in a certain bracket for money.
So yeah, so in that core question of who participates, who would be there, who is your core audience that'll be there, that is different for everyone, right? And so for you, you may not have the same challenges in the framework of fundraising. You may not do a broad gala event that is open to everyone. You may do a gala that is very specific to people that have money and resources to donate. And this is just an example that we're throwing out there. But I think in the case that you're talking about, then they just might give you money and you don't even need to do anything. You know, you could just do a call of, hey, we're trying to fundraise, please make your donation.
Okay, wouldn't that be nice?
Do it. I don't know. But that's another thing, is meet them where they are. If that's your target, you can figure out a way to work with them to say, how can we get you to invest in us right now in this moment? And I'm finding that a lot of people who do philanthropy are more giving right now and less restrictive on how they give. So, you know, those are also ways that you can engage people who do have more access. And then a Zoom meeting might work because everyone can participate in a 1-hour meeting, learn about the organization, and maybe the way in which you create the meeting, maybe storytelling, or, you know, getting some emotional influence, that might be the best way to deliver to that audience. So it's just another example. Any other questions or challenges you face with maybe specific types of activities, online activities?
One thing our group talked a little bit about was the Zoom fatigue, and sort of by having a virtual event, you're limiting people who may just go along to an event because they want to learn more about your organization, or were invited by someone but don't know. You're sort of limiting the pie with a Zoom event potentially to the people who already know about you and are committed to you. So we talked much more about, like, not a Zoom event, but getting out and doing more pop-up events.
Which group were you in?
We were number 5. So, like, drive-through, someone suggested a movie or a drive-in movie, or sort of just trying to rethink the format a little bit to focus on community and to focus on people who might not know about your organization.
Right. So if you start with that clear purpose and goal, and getting to that goal does not require the virtual space, then what your activities are change. So that's sort of what I'm excited to see, that you guys came up with such great ideas, because you are thinking outside the box. This is the time to do it, right? And a lot of you did share alternative ways to have an event that does not have to be virtual, because I think that's very important. it's like hit or miss, because people are either participating because they have time in their home, or they're not participating because they're sick of looking at a screen. So it's like you can get either one, and it's like if you have both opportunities, if you do offer some segment, then you can get those people that will commit. But then also you could record it and people can watch it when they want to, and do those other non-virtual video on-screen type activities to still reach your goal. So yeah, thank you guys all for sharing that.
One thing I've seen on Facebook, we didn't talk about this, but people have activities and they sell tickets online, and then you can go or not go if you attire a Zoom.
Yeah, so you could just, yeah, that's definitely true, because you know that the money is going towards the organization or whatever, and so whether you attend or not, you still got to donate to that organization, and that's another way too. Well, before we get into the next activity, we did just want to allow you time to take a 10-minute break. Not the activity, another example to problem solve through together. So feel free to turn your cameras off, just 10 minutes. The next activity is going to be around advocacy in this time, and how we do more action-driven engagements. So stay tuned. Okay, so now we're going to get into some specific tactics for making change and to push decision makers and sort of leverage the capacity that you've built within your community to make change. And so these are some tactics that we've seen and we know, doing some traditional things such as petitions, letter writings. Of course, you can hold meetings for these types of things as well. And meeting with elected officials and stakeholders is much harder now, but it is something that's really important. Elected officials do still have people that are in their offices, even though most of the time people are working remotely. But public officials, well, at least in Boston, there are some people still in their offices, so you can still reach out. But direct actions, and particularly demonstrations and marches, have become a lot more challenging, not just because, well, marches maybe not, so we've been able to hold a few marches, but more like protests and things, mostly because you may not be reaching the target that you want. And so it's really important to kind of think about and rethink these things in this time about how do you still leverage your network, your members, and the movement that you have to make change when it's something that very specific. And even with marches and more protests, they may not be able to drive a specific change. They do bring a lot of awareness to the issue, but they may not actually create that change and get to that next phase that you want. So for this particular activity, we really want to focus on a specific change that you want to see, and for you to articulate what that sort of is. And so if we go to the example we have here, so this is the same considerations, except we really want to kind of focus on who we're targeting and really clarifying like what is the outcome of the action. So you can do all of those things on that page to build awareness, to make change or whatever. But particularly in this time, if you want to have a specific agenda item, if you want to get something changed or get something noticed, you have to be a lot more strategic, and people are using their time a lot more wisely. So, it's really important to be very clear about these things. And you're really trying to engage your members in moving this forward, but your audience might be the person you're trying to reach. And so you need to be very clear about who you're targeting with this strategy, and then how you will engage your folks in moving it forward. So let's look at the example we're going to be looking at. So your residents are concerned about MBTA schedule changes due to budget cuts. We This is happening in my neighborhood, which is Fenway right now. And they are cutting the bus lines that usually run regularly, and they're only going to be running twice a day now. And it's really been difficult to get the attention of your city councilor. This is not necessarily the case here, but in our example, we're going to say you're trying to reach out to your city councilor, you're trying to get their attention so that they can use their influence to try to stop this from happening. And so you do find out that there's a public hearing in 30 days. And so you have 30 days to kind of figure out something. What tactics would you use to be able to voice the concern you have, and how, what is the strategy you're using? So what is the goal and what's the strategy you're going to use? And how do you ensure diverse opportunities for engagement? So maybe, the hearing is going to be a virtual hearing, just so that we're clear there. It's not a hearing, it's a virtual hearing. But what are the other ways that you could potentially get people to support this that maybe can't attend the virtual hearing? Any questions about this specific example? We're going to do a similar exercise that we just did for the previous activity, but focused on this specific action that you're trying to take.
So is the public hearing with the city council, or is that with MBTA?
That's a good question. And I think you can create that for yourself. It depends on what you want to do.
Okay.
I will let you use creative license there.
Yep, and once again, there's another Google Doc in the chat that has the prompt at the top of the document, along with in the chat box. I think we are down a few folks, so I think instead of having 5 groups, we'll have 4 groups this time. Curious, was the 15 minutes in the groups last time a good amount of time for you all, or do you think you want less or more? 15 was good? A little too long? Okay, maybe we'll start with 10 minutes. We'll do a check-in and see after about 7 or so minutes where you're at, especially since you now kind of already had a chance to work with this framework. It might not take as long this time. So we'll say 10 to 12 minutes in small groups. Naya's working her magic and she'll send you off when I'm done talking. Thanks, folks. Hey everyone, welcome back. Sorry if we cut your conversation short. If you didn't get to everything, that's totally fine. We can continue the conversation in the large group wherever you left off.
Thank you, Kelly. So you guys have, I'm looking at the Google Doc right now. You guys have made some really good additions here. And it's clear that you have created, you have different goals about what the purpose is. And so that's actually really great, because it just tells me that you're being very strategic, because for different people, the immediate goal may be awareness, or it may be to try to stop this. And depending on who you're talking to, then, your goal may shift, but you want to be very clear on what that is, because then how you reach those people that you're targeting becomes really important. What did you find to be difficult about completing this form this time?
This scenario is much more realistic to me, even though we don't have a bus system on the Cape like an MBTA, but it resonated more, trying to get the attention of your town, or we have an assembly of county commissioners and an assembly of delegates for the county.
So maybe this was easier for some of you.
I think it was relevant because for the work that we do, it's a lot of moving parts, and you might have that one target audience, but it's really how do you get in front of that target audience. You have voluntary community members who are interested for their own specific reason, but how do you get the message in front of those who may not, it may not pertain to, or they don't think it pertains to them at that time.
Mm-hmm. Does that resonate with other folks too? So you see that who is left out of the part of the conversation. Well, you are all targeting kind of different people, so I'm going to kind of focus this conversation on who is left out. And what are some of the new challenges you saw about who's left out beyond those specific populations that we've spoken about already? What are some of the new populations and new groups of people that you're trying to reach that are left out of this discussion?
I had a quick question. When you say new populations, are you talking about populations that are maybe the ones that can't afford transportation? I don't know. Could you clarify a little bit more?
Yeah, thank you for that question. In the previous activity, we identified some specific groups of people, including non-English speakers or people without access to internet or trouble using Zoom and technology pieces, or seniors and things like that, because we were specifically focusing on a virtual kind of space. And there's different types of people that are not able to participate. So just kind of getting an understanding of what you guys are seeing that is, and it's really based on who you're targeting. So who then is not part of this, because the target is is broader depending on what you decided to do. And so
I would say, yeah, I heard that in the earlier discussion. I was just wondering, thank you for clarifying. I would say the underemployed because of time. Time denotes access. You're underemployed, you're working either long shifts, 2 jobs or more, and just being able to have access because of shared time and availability of it, because you're underemployed, that might be it. And people who are in extremely rural areas or areas that are cut off from full transportation, that's another issue of access, I think.
We also talked about, I think this is somewhat related, of some of the, or most of the things we were talking about of options of, getting the word out was focused on individual community members. And one of the things we talked about was the impact this would have on businesses or employers who are, whose employees rely on the bus system. And so we were thinking of ways to get to that business community. So like through a chamber of commerce or different clubs that are in the community that would involve the employers and trying to get their attention as well on the impact.
Yeah. And how might you try to engage those audiences, those people that may not be able to engage with your core strategy?
We had talked in our group about doing a simple flyer and posting it in target areas with a QR code. That way, be it through SurveyMonkey or whatever other kind of service you can use, you can capture that information and even put a petition on it if they wanted to participate and leave an electronic footprint, which is acceptable now. Then we can still reach those audiences that don't have time or access.
Yep, and it's easier. They're potentially at the bus stop where you are engaging a core audience, and potentially people who take the bus have less time, right? And it's a really great way to use a mix of like an old method with a new method, because petitions are very traditional way of doing it, but it's a really great way to get them to participate and to say that they also, even though they can't show up, they agree with the stance you're taking. So I'll just share the last slide tonight. If you can share the last slide for me. Or my last slide at least. So thank you all for your participation and input on this and these two activities. Just some quick tips. I'm just going to highlight things you've already said. You know, sometimes for specific meetings, they do need to be virtual, whether, you know, obviously we talked about some that could have alternatives to virtual spaces, but some do need to be virtual, and you may potentially need to find resources to support, you know, giving your members hotspots and the ability to participate. You also want to allow space for creativity. You guys have come up with some really great ideas here, and those members that you are engaging and are able to participate, and again, those core group of members can also help you with coming up with creative ideas on how to reach those people that tend to be excluded from the discussion. Sometimes it's a matter of having multiple events, not just one. And they could be smaller engagements, or they could be with specific target groups of people, so that you can have a very unique, personalized experience. And if it fits the goal that you're trying to reach, then that might be something to do. And you can also just do alternative forms of engagement and more traditional forms of engagement that we've talked about already. So really trying to think beyond just, you know, sort of tunnel vision of what the goal is, how we normally do it, but allowing space for more opportunities, because the more opportunities you can have, the more opportunities for your diverse membership to participate, as well as this may take more time. This may take more capacity on your leaders and your organizers, but this is a really great way to have a more meaningful and engaging and opportunity for that relationship building as well. So yeah, we can stop sharing for a second. We did want to do let me see, how many people do we have? We wanted to do a quick energizer activity. And for this activity, hold on, sorry, there's like, just want to make sure this is all good. All right, and so for this activity, it's a little fun activity that works if we have a smaller group. Since we lost a couple people, we could do this. So we're going to move into our last section, but we wanted to get you all a little motivated. And if you can, please do turn on your camera for this activity, if you can. If the person when you get into a room cannot turn on their camera, then you win. You win automatically. So what this is like high stakes rock, paper, scissors, right? This is competition mode, y'all. So you're gonna start off in a pair. You and the person that you're in your breakout room with are gonna do a rock, paper, scissors game, just one game, and see who wins. And you'll be put into another room with two other people, and the two people that won in those spaces will then play each other. This is tournament, high stakes, right? You got it? And you're gonna go rock, paper, scissors, shoot. And you have to be on screen to do this so you can see it, right? So this is what I just did. And so everyone's gonna shoot on the shoot. And I trust all of you to play fairly this game, right? Chris got it. Good job, guys. Thank you for engaging, participating in that. Congratulations, you win nothing but our highest praise.
That's all I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, so I hope y'all feel energized. We're in the home stretch. We're just going to talk about social media. I'll keep this as light as possible. But I think this is a really good segue from Jamiah's last segment, because as we're moving into this virtual advocacy space, we really need to lean in to social media. So I wanted to start broadly by pointing out that as the content creators and as the coalition leaders or advocates, organizers, we always worry and think about how do we engage people. And we forget that every day we are constantly being engaged. I uttered the sentence to my friends the other day that I need a humidifier now that my heat is on, and suddenly I am inundated with ads for humidifiers. So it's just a nice check that even though we're doing the engaging, a lot of the times we are constantly being engaged. So think about the social media platforms that you're on. My personal favorite is Twitter. What are some really good social media accounts and why are they good? Anyone have any initial thoughts that they want to share around one social media account they just really like what content they push out?
I like Project Bread because it's very clear. They use bold colors and they put their hotline there, and it's not, I'm not sure how engaging it is, like, oh, I can't wait to see what they come up with next, but it gets the message out in a very clear and succinct way.
Thanks for sharing. I also like that account. And I'm going to jump on your food justice and food oriented and say that one of my favorites is Civil Eats. Similarly, what you said, they use really engaging, clear colors. They use a lot of headlines that the content speaks to me. So not just am I interested in the content that they're pushing out, but the way they say it, they have very much an equity focus. So I'm just really, I always click on their articles almost no matter what. I always retweet them just because they're engaging. They have photos, they have links. Usually they have hashtags that I follow. And so these are all things that you should think about as you're pushing out content. So I want to also just like lay the foundation on how we can kind of think about our social media use before we get into some advocacy tactics. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is geared towards Twitter, but it can also be applied to Facebook, to LinkedIn, to Instagram. And this is just thinking about a general strategy. And I also want to name too that particularly now, I think we're all really stretched thin with what we're doing, more so than usual. And so engaging and doing social media might seem kind of daunting to folks, but the reason we really want to get into this content strategy is to take some of that pressure off you to know that you don't have to always be the ones making content, because when you think about your balance and your ratio of what content you should be writing, 60% of that should be curated from external sources. And that's the majority of your content. That is stuff that you are just retweeting, sharing on Facebook, sharing on LinkedIn, maybe liking on Instagram, sharing it to your story. So it just involves time spent on the apps. So you don't have to worry about a whole content strategy, about writing 180 characters, what hashtag should I use when, just to get following, to reach some people. Sometimes all you have to do is just say like, I care about food, I care about public health, I care about racial justice, so I'm going to retweet all of these 3 content areas, and this is what this Twitter account or LinkedIn account is all about. 30% of that should be some original content, and this could be something that your organization has written, a blog post that you wrote, maybe a journal entry if you're more of like an academic institution and you got published. These are all things that you should be advocating. But when I think about the Twitter accounts that I follow, or even LinkedIn, when it's just all people who are sharing things like, here's what I wrote, here's a story that my organization wrote. When it's all of that, it just feels like not very holistic. Like I like the organizations that mix a mix of like their own original content, but also like a mix of content that reflects their mission and vision too. And then 10% is like that ask. So this is kind of where that engagement piece comes in. This is take my survey. come to my meeting, come to my training, or click on this link to do something there. 10% is not a lot, but if you cushion that with all of this external sources and your internal content, it feels like you're building up your ethos so that people are more likely to click on your promotional content because you look like the expert and you also seem like someone who's really in that field tapping into partners and stakeholders. Any questions about this ratio before I move on into what that might look like?
I know you said this is mostly for like Twitter, but does this ratio change at all depending on what platform it is?
I don't think so, because I think LinkedIn, this would work. Facebook, this would work too. It just isn't quite as easy on some accounts because there's the retweet and the share on Twitter and Facebook. Instagram is a little bit trickier because when you reshare, it's more to the story platform and not necessarily like your main account. But I think as a general rule of thumb, this works for all platforms.
Thank you.
Yeah. So on the next slide, I want to share what that curated content can look like and how to make sure it ties back to your organization's mission and vision. And this is, again, all the reason we're talking about general social media principles is that in order to leverage social media as a tool for engagement, you have to just leverage social media broadly and build your brand, build your message, and build your base as an organization. So on the left, we have HRIA, which is a parent organization of this project, the Community Health Training Institute. So we often retweet and share each other's content, which is another strategy I'll get to in just a minute. But Health Resources in Action, or HRIA, like Gina said, we have many acronyms in public health, and I always have to catch myself and make sure I'm explaining what the acronyms are. But we are a public health institution, and we really just focus on the large social determinants of health and the systemic barriers that prevent people from being the healthiest they can possibly be. And so as we're curating content, we want to make sure that we retweet content that aligns with that mission. So when the eviction moratorium was lifted, we created a resource guide for that, but we were also really intentional about making sure that we're retweeting any coalitions in Massachusetts or any content broadly that might make a statement on the eviction moratorium. And same for the Training Institute too. We build capacity, we build skills. We also build content knowledge around public health. And so the APHA released a statement about what pulling from the Paris Agreement would mean for health. Both of these things were retweeted. HRIA didn't add any content, but at CHTI we added one sentence, some hashtags. But what I did for both of these, you just kind of scroll through your feed and you see something that's like, oh, this matches my message, this fits my content, this is relevant for followers. I can just retweet it, or I can build on it and add some more information. But this is like that 60% of you don't have to put much brain space into it. You see it, you like it, and you retweet it. For the original content, this is where you're sharing things that you create as part of your own institute or as part of your own coalition or organization. So for Health Resources in Action, we created, our vice president wrote a blog post around the role of philanthropy in achieving health and racial equity through cross-sector partnerships. This is really kind of where we're building our thought leadership, building our ethos as an organization who does public health work in this field. Same with the Community Health Training Institute. This is from our last training that we did. We did a training on facilitating successful online meetings, and we wanted to make sure that we were marketing and building our brand so that when we're engaging people in future trainings, they know that they're going to get really interactive, really engaging virtual training. So we wanted to promote our last training, some content from that to show like what's an element of a good meeting, shows kind of what we're about, where our capacity building skills lie. And this is, again, about 30% of your feed. If you wanted to do something around LinkedIn or wanted to do something around Instagram, it would be the same thing. You would share a picture, you would share an article that your organization wrote. So even though we use Twitter most often, mainly because our audience likes Twitter, I find Twitter to be really good for stakeholders and other coalitions and public health institutes. So that's where we're most active on, but same thing for Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'll get into TikTok in a little bit, so get ready for that. But lastly, that promotional content. This is kind of where you're marketing yourself, saying like, have you requested a training yet? We have options. You can send us an email. We'll come to you. Make sure you click on the link and fill out that survey. Or it could be the ask of attend our virtual symposium. Any questions so far about the difference between them or kind of how to go about making any of these posts? Cool. I know I'm going through this fast. I just want to make sure I get to the case studies. So now that you kind of realize the general frameworks for how to go about building out your social media channels, building out your following, you really want to sit back and ask yourself, who do I want to connect with? Am I on LinkedIn because I need a job? Am I on LinkedIn because I want to recruit someone for my organization? Am I on Twitter because I want to connect with other PhD students pursuing public health research? Am I on Instagram because I want to connect to young people? Once you ask yourself these questions, that's when you can start honing in on your strategy. So if you're looking to connect with young people, you might not want to be on Twitter. You might want to be on Instagram, on TikTok. You might want to be on maybe Facebook, probably not. I feel like I'm now out of the bracket of technically young people. So I used to speak to that, but now I'm like, do I have authority there? I don't know. But if you want to look for other businesses, I think Twitter and LinkedIn is the best place to go. Twitter especially, it's really fast paced. It's really good for calling people out, uplifting their voices, retweeting, sharing all of that. Same with stakeholders, especially if you want to reach out to academics. Once you're on Twitter and LinkedIn too, you can find out what hashtag works. So for example, I'm on a project working with RISE, Massachusetts. I don't know if anyone's aware of them, but they're a substance use organization that funds and gives resources towards addressing the opioid epidemic. And we're creating a toolkit for them. And so I was looking to find what kind of Good Samaritan laws exist on college campuses, like if the laws are applied from the state to the campus policy. So if someone overdoses on a college campus, we know they're protected by the Good Samaritan law if a peer has some drugs on them, but they call the ambulance to save their peer. But what happens with campus police? Are they expelled? Are they, do they have their financial aid taken away from them? This isn't information that's readily available on websites. This is not something that college campuses really promote. So if you go on Twitter, there's Academic Chatter. It's both an account, it's like a bot that will retweet anything with the hashtag academic Twitter. Same thing with Epi Twitter. If you're into like epidemiological data, you can do the hashtag Epi Twitter, and then a whole group of people who follow this hashtag will respond to it. So I made an ask on academic Twitter, like, hey, what are your campus policies around the Good Samaritan laws? A couple people DM'd me saying, hey, I'm from like the University of Tennessee and here's what we have. So it's a really good way to engage with partners in this work. Which can then help inform community engagement too. Because if you have a survey and you're doing a statewide survey for Massachusetts, and the survey wants to have representation in many different communities from Western Mass to Southeast Mass, you need those community gatekeepers. So you might want to tag a couple of different coalitions or organizations who you know have power in those communities, so then they can retweet it, and then that can access their community members. And like if it comes from the coalition's Twitter account or LinkedIn, people will probably be more likely to click on that link and take that survey because there's that connection. So even if you're using Twitter to connect with other stakeholders, you're kind of roundaboutly getting to the residents that you want to engage to. So I want to get into quickly some case studies, because when we talk about using social media as a form of digital advocacy, it can be hard to kind of reframe traditional advocacy to online media. And I really want to advocate for using young people, not just as someone to ask for advice, like, does this Facebook post look cool? Would you click on this? But like, give them power to lead whole campaigns, because young people are more than capable. They have connections, they have a voice, and when they lead campaigns, people, especially stakeholders and policy writers, they love that, and they're more likely to listen to young people because it's different. So we did the Fight All Flavors campaign, which is an entirely youth-led movement supported by adults, funded by adults, and funded by the Mass Department of Public Health. And it was really engaging young people to fight against the tobacco industry and the vaping industry, who were disproportionately targeting young people to use their products. So because the issue affected young people most, it made sense for them to lead those campaigns. So this looked like them going to the State House, going to Board of Health meetings. Tonight, if you go to the next slide, there are some pictures of young people at both of them. So the picture on the left was a Board of Health meeting last November, where we were advocating for the Boston passage of the ban on menthol, mint, and wintergreen tobacco products, which mostly affect Black and Brown communities and young people too, because they're advertised disproportionately to them, they use them disproportionately. So we were in this really packed room with a lot of small convenience store lobbyists, big tobacco suits. You'll see a couple of men in suits who were there to advocate on behalf of big tobacco. And then our side was just all young people. And so this young woman on the left-hand picture who was looking at her phone was giving a testimony, which was so powerful because usually everyone else kind of stood at the front of the room and directed their speech at the Board of Health members. But what she had done, she turned around and she looked at all of the convenience store members and tobacco lobbyists and was like, I know you are in my community, and I know that you've sold your vaping and tobacco products to at least 4 of my friends. How dare you? And it was the most powerful thing ever. Even though in the room we were outnumbered, it passed unanimously by the Board of Health that there was going to be a flavor restriction. So it was a big win. It was all youth-led, but again, this was in person. So how can we kind of capitalize on this energy that young people have and bring that into the online space? So I want to talk a little bit about the Ed Markey campaign, who was reelected this past November. And it wasn't looking so good in the beginning of the election cycle. He was down by a lot. He's a 74-year-old man who's been around for a long time in Congress and Senate, and was opposed by someone who was saying, I am the voice of the young people because I'm a young person. I'm a new face, vote for me. And so what the Ed Markey campaign did really well is that they became youth-focused and youth-led, which entirely turned the campaign around, because young people in high school who weren't even of voting age and college students, they were all organizing online on behalf of Ed Markey, and they had a really comprehensive digital strategy, which consisted of all of these meme accounts, which were kind of ridiculous. You'll see in the bottom right corner, it's the Reply Guys account, and there's the banner that says, excuse you, I'm on my way to save the climate, thanks. And like, I don't totally get that, but like, I know they have 3,000 followers, and high schoolers and young people really rallied and came behind that because it was a youth-led movement. There were young people for Markey, college students for Markey, picked up by the Globe, that, you know, this man really redefined himself by putting young people at the forefront. So when we think about both advocating for nonprofit initiatives like tobacco laws, but also just advocating for anything in the policy realm, people are very responsive to young people. They know their stuff, they organize really well, and they usually have the time and resources to do it, which we as nonprofit folks and coalition folks often don't have the time to do social media because it is an add-on to our job that already takes 40 plus hours a week to do. So that's my case, that if you are using social media, set your foundations by using that 60-30-10 framework, but also find an issue that the young people will champion around and let them run with it, because they do incredible things. And I'll just quickly share some resources that if you don't have young people, or you do have them, but you also are doing some tweeting or LinkedIn, Facebook posting on your own, there are tools to do it that you don't have to spend hours and hours a week tweeting always. Hootsuite lets you schedule tweets out in advance. You can also connect it to Facebook, to Instagram, and to LinkedIn. So you can have one post scheduled for Tuesday, for Thursday, and for Friday that will post at 12 p.m. on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it. You can do that for the whole month if you want. You can also organize Hootsuite into streams so that when you log on to Hootsuite, there's your account in one column. If you're following a hashtag like hashtag health equity, a stream of tweets will show up all involving health equity in the middle, and then you can just retweet different things right there. You can also create lists in Hootsuite that consist of any profile that you manually input. So for the Training Institute, we have some virtual friends and advocacy partners who we always retweet, we always like them because they'll do the same for us. And so I know the organizations that I'm really cool with, and so I'll add them to our CHGI stream so that they will be in one place so that I can retweet them and like them at any time. And it's much easier to find them there instead of scrolling through my actual Twitter feed where I might have like 700 accounts that I'm following. You can also do analytics, which help you show which posts did really well and when, and how many people you reached. Because even if 3 people like your tweet, it can still reach about like 20,000 people, which is something that I was really surprised at when I started doing reporting for our social media accounts, because I would get really sad when one tweet had like 1 retweet and 1 like, and then I would look at it and it had like about 15,000 impressions. So people are still looking at it somehow, even if they're not necessarily engaging with it. So some good things to think about. And then there are some more resources around analytics that really get into like deep into the weeds. So on the next slide, there's things like Canva, which lets you edit images that you can then tweet or share on Facebook or Instagram. There are things like Quozio that will let you pull quotes and like, you know, make them look really pretty. You can make memes, lots of different things that you can do with social media to make sure that you're posting really dynamic posts. And for the last slide, I just wanted to give an opportunity for you all to share any additional resources that you find helpful, either with social media or just broadly with community engagement total, because I think Jamiah and I have many resources, but you all probably collectively have way more. And so after you share some in the chat box, we can compile them and send them back out to you. So any resources that you all want to share? Or any last minute questions. I know we have about 4 minutes left, so no worries if you don't have any resources, and we can include some that we find helpful in the follow-up email. Awesome. Well, with that, I will plug all of our accounts. You can follow us on the Training Institute at HRIA Institute on Twitter. But there's also the main HRA account, which is HRA Action. Jamiah and I are very available via email if you have any more questions or want to connect with us. But Yeah, thank you so much for your participation today, for your questions, and for just being really engaged.